In the savage winter of 2023, the mountaineering world watched with bated breath as Liam and Sarah Jenkins, a young, fiercely talented British couple, began their audacious attempt on K2. Their goal was not just the summit, but a purist's dream, a winter ascent without supplemental oxygen. They were radiant, their faces etched with the cold, sharp joy of ambition, documented in a popular blog that chronicled their journey from the training grounds of the Alps to the jagged maw of the Karakoram. Their last post was a photo of a single tent against an impossible backdrop of blue-black ice and star-dusted sky, captioned "The Final Push." See you on the other side. They were never seen again. The subsequent search was a desperate, heroic, and ultimately futile affair. For 2 weeks, high-altitude porters and helicopter teams scoured the designated route, battling hurricane-force winds and crippling temperatures that dipped below -50 degrees Celsius. They found nothing. No shredded tent, no abandoned gear, not a single trace. The mountain, in its brutal, indifferent way, had swallowed them whole. The search was officially called off, their names added to the long, somber list of those claimed by the savage mountain. Their story became a cautionary tale, a testament to the fine line between bravery and folly. But 6 months later, in the relative calm of the summer climbing season, the story refused to remain buried. A lone Japanese alpinist, Kenji Tanaka, on a solo acclimatization run to Camp 3, deviated from the standard route to shelter from a sudden, violent squall. Huddled in the lee of a massive serac, he noticed something unnatural wedged deep within a narrow, shadowed crevasse. It wasn't the bright nylon of a modern jacket, but the pale, stark white of bone. Lowering himself carefully on a rope, he found the source, a human skeleton, partially clad in the tattered remains of a down suit, frozen into the ice. It was a grim but not entirely unexpected discovery on a peak that served as a vertical graveyard. Yet, nestled beside the body, half submerged in the glacial ice, was an object that made the blood freeze in Kenji's veins. It was a satellite phone, its casing shattered as if by a deliberate, powerful blow. It was this anomaly, a piece of broken technology in a place of primitive survival, that would transform a tragic accident into a terrifying mystery, and prove that the most savage thing on the mountain that winter had not been the cold. The discovery ignited a firestorm, reaching the desk of Alex Thorne, a man who had long ago traded the razor's edge of high-altitude climbing for the cold, hard logic of investigation. Alex Thorne sat in his quiet study in Chamonix, the jagged peaks of the Mont Blanc massif framed by his window, a landscape that had once been his playground and was now a quiet, respected adversary. He was a man carved from the same granite as the mountains he loved, with a face weathered by sun and wind and eyes that held the deep, weary calm of someone who had stared into the abyss and chosen to step back. His career as one of the world's most formidable alpinists had been cut short by a fall on Nanga Parbat, a fall that had taken his partner and shattered his leg, leaving him with a permanent limp and a ghost that walked with him in the silent hours of the night. He had since channeled his obsessive focus and intimate knowledge of the world's deadliest environments into a unique role. A special investigator for the Global Rescue and Repatriation Consortium, a private organization funded by insurance underwriters and wealthy families to solve the unsolvable cases of the wild. He specialized in disappearances where the only witness was the landscape itself. The email from his director was succinct, containing a link to a news report from Pakistan. K2. Jenkins' case. They found one. Looks straightforward, but there's an anomaly. Your expertise requested. Alex clicked the link. The initial report was simple. Body found, likely one of the missing climbers from the winter expedition. The official Pakistani authorities were preparing to rule it an accident, another tragedy to be filed away. But then he read Kenji Tanaka's statement, translated and attached in a supplementary file. The satellite phone. Shattered. Alex leaned forward, his focus sharpening, the familiar hum of the hunt beginning to thrum beneath his skin. Climbers, especially purists like the Jenkinses, were meticulous about their gear. Every ounce was weighed, every piece of equipment logged for sponsors and safety records. A satellite phone was essential, but a smashed one? In a fall it might break. But Kenji's description of the damage, a focused, starburst fracture pattern on the screen and casing, spoke of impact, not a tumbling, chaotic fall. It hinted at something else. Rage. Deliberation. He looked at the photo of Liam and Sarah Jenkins on his screen. They were so young, their eyes blazing with a fire he remembered in himself. They had approached the mountain with respect and humility, a stark contrast to the modern circus of guided clients. His gut, an instinct honed by 1,000 life-or-death decisions on rock and ice, told him this was wrong. The narrative was too simple, too clean. The mountain was a killer, yes, but it was an impartial one. It didn't smash phones. He spent the next hour rereading the final report on the initial search and rescue operation. It was thorough on the surface, detailing flight paths, search grids, and weather data. But one name appeared repeatedly, a consultant credited with helping coordinate the Pakistani military's efforts from afar, Julian Croft. The name was legendary. Croft was the elder statesman of mountaineering, an author, philanthropist, and the sole survivor of a half-dozen cursed expeditions that had cemented his godlike status. He had written the definitive book on K2's winter temperament. Alex felt a strange, cold knot tighten in his stomach. Croft's involvement felt less like a helpful gesture and more like the insertion of a controlling hand, guiding the narrative from the very beginning. He wrote back to his director, "I'm on my way. Hold the official cause of death. And get me everything you can on Julian Croft's involvement with the Jenkins expedition." The ghost on his shoulder was silent. The hunt was on. The air at the K2 base camp was thin and sharp, tasting of rock dust and diesel fumes from the generator that powered the temporary command post. The summer climbing season was in full swing, a chaotic canvas of brightly colored tents and prayer flags flapping in the relentless wind, but Alex moved through it all as a shadow, his focus turned inward, toward a ghost from 6 months prior. The Pakistani military had established a small, efficient operation to coordinate the recovery. Major Iqbal, a stern but professional officer, greeted him with a firm handshake, his eyes appraising Alex's limp. "Mr. Thorne, your reputation precedes you. We believe this to be a simple matter of recovery, but your consortium's request has been noted." Alex nodded, foregoing pleasantries. "I need to see the remains. And the discoverer, Mr. Tanaka." Kenji Tanaka was sitting in the mess tent of his own expedition, his face pale, his gaze distant. He recounted his discovery in a low, precise voice, the trauma still fresh. "I have climbed for 20 years, he said, staring into his cup of tea. "I have seen bodies before. But this was different." He drew a diagram on a napkin, sketching the crevasse, the position of the body. He was deep inside, protected. Not a place you would fall into from the route above. It is a place you would go to hide, or a place you would be put. He then described the phone again. The damage was angry, like someone took an ice axe to it. 1, 2, 3 times. To be sure. Alex listened, his mind a cold engine of analysis. A place you would be put. The words echoed. He thanked Kenji, his respect for the man's observational skill growing. He then proceeded to the makeshift morgue, a refrigerated container humming in the cold. Inside, under a sterile white sheet, lay the evidence. The forensic pathologist, Dr. Arsalan, was already at work. The skeleton was mostly complete, stripped clean by the elements and scavengers. "The gear matches the Jenkins manifest," Dr. Arsalan said, pointing to a table where shredded fabric and a climbing harness were laid out. "And the height and build are consistent with Liam Jenkins. We're awaiting dental record confirmation, but I'm 99% certain." Alex walked around the examination table, his gaze sweeping over the bones. He stopped, pointing to the right femur. "A clean, transverse fracture." "This break," Alex said, his voice low. "It's very clean. A fall from height, a tumbling fall, you'd expect comminuted fractures. Spiral breaks. This looks more like a single, high-velocity impact." Dr. Arsalan nodded slowly. "It is unusual. I had noted it. It could be from striking a single rock edge during a fall, but yes, it is atypical." Alex then turned to the other table, the one holding the catalyst for his journey. The satellite phone. He picked it up carefully with gloved hands. Kenji had been right. The damage wasn't random. It was focused on the center of the device, a spiderweb of cracks radiating from 3 distinct impact points. It was an act of destruction. He looked at Major Iqbal. "The memory chip and SIM card. Have you tried to recover them?" The Major shook his head. "They are heavily damaged. Our field technology is limited. It would require a specialist." Alex knew just the person. "I want them. I'm having them sent to a contact in Lyon. And I want the official cause of death listed as pending investigation. This is no longer a simple recovery, Major. This is a potential crime scene." The Major's eyes widened slightly, the professional mask cracking for just a second. The idea of a murder at 8,000 meters was almost unthinkable. The mountain was the killer. It was always the mountain. But as Alex stared at the smashed phone, he knew that this time, the killer had left a calling card. While the fragile memory chip from the satellite phone made its delicate journey from the Karakoram to a sterile lab in France, Alex Thorne immured himself in a digital catacomb. He sequestered himself in a hotel room in Skardu, the last bastion of reliable internet before the wilderness took over, and began the meticulous process of reconstructing the lives and, more importantly, the final weeks of Liam and Sarah Jenkins. He read every word of their blog, Our Savage Dream. It was filled with youthful optimism, technical gear reviews, and poignant reflections on the allure of the world's highest peaks. They were skilled, prepared, and deeply in love, not just with each other, but with the raw, unforgiving beauty of the mountains. Their posts were a breadcrumb trail of logistics and emotion. Alex compiled a timeline, cross-referencing their dispatches with weather reports, shipping manifests, and flight records. Everything seemed normal, everything meticulously planned, until he reached the entries from the month before their departure for Pakistan. There was a subtle shift in tone. A post from Sarah mentioned a last-minute miracle that had saved the expedition. Liam wrote about a generous patron who had stepped in after their primary sponsor had unexpectedly reduced their funding by half. The posts were vague, thanking this anonymous benefactor for their belief in the spirit of true alpinism. Anonymity. In the world of high-stakes mountaineering, anonymity was a red flag. Sponsorship was a billboard. Companies paid for their logos to be seen on the summit, for their names to be attached to glory. A silent partner was almost unheard of. It suggested a different kind of motive, one that wasn't commercial. Alex started digging, using the consortium's resources to pry open encrypted emails and financial records that were sealed to the public. He traced the wire transfer. The funds hadn't come from a corporation, but from a private trust, a labyrinthine entity designed to obscure its source. But even the most complex financial structures had a manager, a point of contact. After 2 days of relentless digital excavation, he found a name in a single, buried email exchange with Liam concerning the final gear shipment. The name was Julian Croft. The cold knot in Alex's stomach tightened into a knot of ice. Croft again. Not just a consultant on the search, but the architect of the expedition's funding. He was the anonymous benefactor. Alex pulled up everything he could find on the man. The public image was flawless, a silver-haired icon, his face weathered into a mask of rugged wisdom. His books were bestsellers, philosophical musings on risk and reward disguised as adventure stories. He was a frequent guest on talk shows, a philanthropist who donated millions to mountain conservation and rescue services. But Alex wasn't interested in the public facade. He was looking for the cracks. He found them in the footnotes of old mountaineering journals and in the bitter, forgotten interviews of men who had climbed with Croft decades ago. A pattern emerged, a dark thread woven through a celebrated career. The 1995 expedition on Annapurna. Croft's partner, a promising German climber, fell to his death during the summit push, leaving Croft to complete the ascent alone, a story of tragic heroism that launched his career. The 2002 attempt on Broad Peak. His 2 companions vanished in a storm, while Croft miraculously navigated his way back to base camp with severe frostbite and another best-selling story of survival. On paper, he was tragically unlucky. To Alex, he looked like a predator who understood that mountains make excellent accomplices. He had found his motive. Liam and Sarah were purists. A successful winter ascent of K2 without oxygen would have been a monumental achievement, perhaps the greatest in a generation. Would have overshadowed everything Croft had ever done. His legacy was built on being the sole survivor, the tragic hero. He couldn't abide a new, brighter story. He hadn't funded their dream. He had funded his opportunity to extinguish it. Alex stared at the screen, the pieces clicking into place with a horrifying certainty. Croft had put himself in control of their expedition. He had chosen their gear, managed their logistics, and then, Alex suspected, he had joined them on the mountain to write his final chapter, one that would only have a single author. The hunt was no longer just for a killer, it was for a monster hiding in plain sight. The video call connected, and the face of Julian Croft filled Alex's laptop screen. He was exactly as he appeared in his interviews. Handsome in a rugged elder statesman way, with kind, crinkling eyes and a backdrop of a magnificent library, books and climbing artifacts artfully arranged behind him. He projected an aura of calm authority and intellectual grace. He had agreed to the meeting instantly when Alex had reached out, citing his role as the Jenkins's benefactor and his deep, personal investment in finding the truth. He began with a performance of practiced sorrow, his voice a low, somber baritone. Mr. Thorne, thank you for your work on this. It is a tragedy that has weighed on me every single day. Liam and Sarah, they were the future. So much talent, so much spirit. To have it snuffed out is a crime against the very soul of climbing. Alex remained impassive, a rock against which Croft's emotional waves crashed. Mr. Croft, my records show you were the anonymous patron who funded their expedition. Can you confirm that? Croft gave a modest, sad smile. I was. I saw in them a purity that has been lost. I didn't want my name attached to it. It wasn't about me. It was about them, about their dream. I didn't want the media to turn it into a story about some old climber living vicariously through the young. It was their moment. The answer was perfect, noble, and utterly disingenuous. A noble sentiment, Alex said, his tone flat. You also provided them with a list of required gear. I have the manifests. Everything standard, top of the line. Except for one item not on that list. The Iridium 9575 Extreme satellite phone found with Liam Jenkins's body. For the first time, a flicker of something other than grief crossed Croft's face. It was a micro-expression, a fractional tightening of the jaw, gone as quickly as it appeared. A phone? I don't recall that specifically. Liam was a gear enthusiast. He may have acquired it himself. They often tested equipment for smaller companies. This model wasn't a test unit, Alex pressed, his gaze unwavering. It was a private purchase, registered to a shell corporation that, after a little digging, traces back to a trust you control. It was your phone, Mr. Croft. Why did you give them a private, untraceable satellite phone? Croft leaned back, steepling his fingers. He was recovering, shifting his strategy from emotional appeal to professorial authority. It was a simple precaution. The standard frequencies on the mountain can get clogged. In an emergency, I wanted them to have a direct, private line to a dedicated rescue coordinator I had on standby. A failsafe. It seems, tragically, they were never able to use it. Another perfect answer. Plausible. Responsible. But Alex knew it was a lie. A private line wasn't for calling for rescue. It was for conversations no one else could ever be allowed to hear. You were also listed as a consultant for the Pakistani military's initial search and rescue operation, Alex continued, methodically laying his cards on the table. Your expertise was, by all accounts, invaluable in determining the search perimeters. I did what any climber would do, Croft said, his humility a weapon. I know that mountain. I know her moods. I provided insight into the most probable areas where they might have run into trouble, based on the storm patterns. I desperately wanted them to be found. Or to ensure they wouldn't be, Alex said, the accusation hanging in the air between them, sharp and cold as a shard of ice. You guided the search away from the western flank, towards the bottleneck and the south face, citing avalanche risk. But Liam's body was found miles from there, in a crevasse on the northwest ridge. A place no one thought to look. A place you would know, wouldn't you? A place you've written about in your own books as a place of no escape. The silence stretched. Croft's mask of serene wisdom was beginning to crack, the fine lines around his eyes deepening not with kindness, but with a cold, simmering fury. He was being challenged, his narrative questioned, and he wasn't accustomed to it. You are making some very serious, very outlandish accusations, Mr. Thorne, Croft said, his voice losing its warmth, taking on a hard, metallic edge. You have a body, a broken phone, and a wild imagination. I am a celebrated figure in this community. Who do you think they will believe? Alex didn't answer. He simply held Croft's gaze, letting the question linger. The call ended, but the confrontation was just beginning. Alex knew Croft would now be on the defensive, perhaps making a mistake. The call hadn't been about getting a confession. It had been about rattling the cage. And as he stared at the blank screen, Alex felt the distinct, thrilling certainty that the monster inside had just been woken up. The package from Lion arrived via a secured courier, a small, anti-static bag containing the delicate, damaged heart of the shattered satellite phone. Alex took it to the consortium's designated tech lab in Islamabad, a sterile, white room filled with the quiet hum of powerful machines. The technician, a young genius named Farid, looked at the mangled chip with a grimace. The physical damage is severe. The impact likely caused a catastrophic power surge to the memory controller. Getting anything off this will be like performing brain surgery on a flea in an earthquake. For 3 days, Alex waited, the tension coiling in his chest. He spent the time methodically charting Julian Croft's life, cross-referencing his famed expeditions with the obituaries of his partners. The pattern was undeniable. Croft was a black widow, climbing to the top over the bodies of his companions, each death adding another layer to his mythos. He was a master of narrative, always positioning himself as the tragic survivor, the man who stared into the abyss and returned with wisdom. The Jenkinses were not just a threat to his legacy, they were a threat to the entire foundation of his identity. On the fourth day, Fard called him into the lab. His eyes were wide with a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. "I got something," he said, his voice hushed. "The main data storage is fried, completely unrecoverable. But the phone's cache memory had a residual data fragment. A single corrupted audio file. It's only a few seconds long, and the quality is terrible." He clicked his mouse. A burst of static filled the room, a sound so distorted it was almost painful. Underneath it was the high, keening shriek of wind, a sound Alex knew intimately, the sound of the death zone. Then came the sound of labored, desperate breathing, a guttural panting that spoke of oxygen-starved lungs. And then cutting through the chaos, a voice. It was calm, clear, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was not Liam Jenkins. It was a voice of chilling serenity, a voice of absolute control. It spoke only 4 words. "Legacy requires sacrifice." The audio file ended. The silence that followed was more profound than the noise it replaced. Alex felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. It was a confession, a mantra, a statement of purpose. It was Croft. He was sure of it. He made Fard play it again and again. The voice was unmistakable in its detached cruelty. At that exact moment, his own phone rang. It was Dr. Arsalan, the pathologist. "Alex, the final forensics on the bones just came back from Islamabad. You were right about the femur. But there's more. We found microscopic bone fragments in the occipital region of the skull." "What does that mean?" Alex asked, his heart pounding. "It means the cause of death wasn't the fall. He had a depressed skull fracture. He was struck from behind. Hard. With a dense, pointed object. The report concludes it's consistent with the pick of an ice axe. Blunt force trauma. Homicide." The pieces were no longer just clicking into place. They were slamming together with the force of an avalanche. Croft hadn't just watched them die. He had, actively, brutally, murdered Liam Jenkins. He had stood over his body, likely retrieved the special satellite phone, and smashed it with his ice axe, believing he was destroying the only evidence of his presence. But in his arrogance, in his rage, he hadn't realized that the phone's dying gasp had recorded his philosophy, his motive, his damnation. The investigation had pivoted. This was no longer about a suspicious death. It was about proving a murder. But one question still tormented Alex, a question that now held an even more horrifying weight. If this was Liam, where was Sarah? The question of Sarah Jenkins's fate became an obsession for Alex. The official report, influenced by Julian Croft's expert consultation, had concluded that the couple, roped together as protocol dictated, had fallen simultaneously. The discovery of Liam, alone, shattered that fundamental assumption. If Liam was murdered, what had happened to his wife? Had she fallen? Had she been killed as well? Or, in a thought that chilled Alex to the bone, had she been a witness? He envisioned the scene with terrifying clarity. Croft, the trusted mentor, striking Liam from behind. Sarah, watching in horror, high in the death zone, with a man who had just revealed himself to be a monster. What would she have done? Run. She would have run. But on K2, there is nowhere to run. Alex returned to the maps, his mind racing. Croft had murdered Liam, and then guided the search parties away from the true location. But he would have had to deal with Sarah. Killing her in the same spot was risky. Another body, another set of wounds to explain. No, Croft was a narcissist, a storyteller. His actions would have a twisted, poetic logic to them. He wouldn't just kill her, he would author her death. Alex requested a high-priority analysis from a satellite imagery intelligence firm the consortium kept on retainer. He gave them a specific set of parameters. "I need you to analyze all available synthetic aperture radar and multispectral imagery of the northwest ridge of K2, he instructed them. Focus on a 5-kilometer radius from the crevasse where Liam Jenkins was found. I'm looking for ground disturbances, depressions, or thermal anomalies from the original window of their disappearance, things that subsequent snowfall would have obscured from visual searches." It was a technological long shot, asking computers to find a ghost in a blizzard from 6 months ago. While he waited, he dove into Croft's most famous book, The Crystal Fortress, his account of his solo survival on Broad Peak. He He wasn't reading it for the story, but for the methodology. He studied how Croft described navigating in whiteouts, how he spoke of snowcraft, of building shelters, of the way the mountain hides its secrets. He was trying to get inside the killer's head, to think like him. He found a chapter where Croft wrote, "The mountain does not bury its dead. It merely hides them in plain sight, pulling a white sheet of snow over them until the spring." It was meant to be poetic, but to Alex, it read like a confession of technique. 3 days later, the report from the imagery firm arrived. Most of the data was noise, the shifting chaos of a high-altitude landscape. But one analyst had flagged a tiny anomaly. A SAR, synthetic aperture radar, passed from 2 days after the Jenkinses' last contact had detected a subtle, oblong depression in a snowfield approximately 2 kilometers east of Liam's location. It was inconsistent with natural wind scooping or sastrugi formation. It was, the analyst noted, roughly the size and shape of a human body. A subsequent image, 12 hours later, showed the depression was gone, smoothed over by a fresh layer of snow. It was the white sheet. Alex felt a surge of adrenaline. He immediately contacted Major Iqbal. "I have a new search coordinate," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "I need a team ready to fly as soon as the weather window opens." The Major was skeptical, but Alex's conviction, backed by the high-tech report, was persuasive. A small, elite team of high-altitude porters was assembled. 2 days later, a helicopter deposited them on a glacier near the coordinates. Guided by a GPS marker, they began to dig. The work was slow and arduous, the snow packed hard as concrete. For hours, they found nothing. Alex monitored the operation from base camp via radio, his knuckles white as he gripped the handset. Doubt began to creep in. Had he sent them on a fool's errand, chasing a digital ghost? Then the call came. The lead porter's voice was strained, breathless from altitude and effort. "We have something. Blue fabric." Alex's own breath hitched. He listened as the team carefully excavated the area. The object was a body encased in ice. A smaller frame. A woman. They had found Sarah Jenkins. She was brought down to the refrigerated container, the same sterile room where her husband's remains had lain. Dr. Arsalan conducted the initial examination with Alex present. There were no signs of blunt force trauma, no broken bones. But as the doctor carefully cut away the sleeve of her down suit, he revealed her wrists. They were raw, chafed, and encircled by the deep, unmistakable ligature marks of a rope. Bound. Croft hadn't killed her with a swift, violent blow. He had committed an act of unimaginable cruelty. He had tied her up and left her to be executed by the mountain itself, to slowly freeze to death, alone and helpless, a silent witness silenced forever. This was the final piece. This was the proof of Croft's psychopathy. He wasn't just a killer, he was a sadist who curated his victims' final moments. Alex Thorne now had everything he needed. He booked a flight, not back to Chamonix, but to a sprawling estate in the English countryside, where a monster was hiding behind a wall of books and a legacy of lies. The taxi crunched up a long, manicured gravel driveway, stopping before a magnificent stone manor that looked as ancient and rooted as the old-growth oaks surrounding it. This was Julian Croft's sanctuary, a fortress of wealth and reputation nestled in the rolling hills of the Cotswolds. It was a world away from the jagged desolation of K2, but Alex knew the same cold, predatory spirit resided here. He had called ahead, not as an investigator, but as a professional colleague requesting a final debrief on the Jenkins case. Croft, ever the magnanimous figurehead of the climbing community, had graciously invited him to his home. Croft met him at the door himself, dressed in expensive cashmere, the picture of a country gentleman. He ushered Alex into the library Alex had seen on the video call. It was even more impressive in person, a shrine to a life of adventure and literary acclaim. A fire crackled in a cavernous hearth. "Mr. Thorne," Croft said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "Please make yourself comfortable. A drink?" I was about to pour myself a scotch. "No, thank you," Alex said, remaining standing. He let his eyes drift around the room, taking in the framed photos of Croft on remote summits, the gleaming ice axes mounted on the wall like trophies. "I've come to close the book on the Jenkins case. We found Sarah." Croft, who had been turning to a crystal decanter, froze for a fraction of a second. He turned back, his face a mask of solemnity. "My God! Where? Was it quick?" "Not particularly," Alex said, his voice flat and cold. "She died of exposure. But the interesting thing was the ligature marks on her wrists. She was bound with a length of 8 millimeters climbing rope. tied with a perfect figure-8 follow-through knot. The kind of professional an expert would tie. Croft was silent, his hand hovering over the decanter. And then there was Liam, Alex continued, his voice a relentless, low-pressure system moving into the room. We confirmed cause of death. Not a fall. Blunt force trauma to the occipital bone. A single, precise blow from the pick of an ice axe. An expert's blow, meant to be instantly fatal. He walked over to the wall where the trophy axes were mounted. He pointed to a particularly ornate one with a gleaming, polished adze and a wickedly sharp pick. Like that one, perhaps. Croft finally turned fully towards him, the mask of the charming host falling away to reveal the cold, hard face of a predator. This is preposterous. You come into my home and accuse me of murder? Yes, Alex interrupted. Because I also have this. He pulled his phone from his pocket and hit play. The small speaker filled the grand library with the shriek of high-altitude wind, the desperate panting, and then the calm, clear voice. Legacy requires sacrifice. Croft's face went white. The voice, his voice, echoing in his own sanctuary, was the one thing he had not accounted for. That's nothing, he stammered, his composure shattering. That's a distorted recording. It could be anyone. It was recovered from the satellite phone you gave Liam Jenkins, Alex said, taking a step closer. The one you smashed with your ice axe after you murdered him. You smashed it to destroy the evidence, but you didn't know about the cache memory. You're a storyteller, Croft. You love to control the narrative. But this time, the story got away from you. Alex laid it all out, his voice a merciless staccato. The anonymous funding. The private phone for private conversations. The deliberate misdirection of the search party. The pattern of your partners dying on your most famous climbs. Annapurna. Broad Peak. Always the sole survivor, the tragic hero. But Liam and Sarah were different. They were going to succeed where you had only curated heroic failure. Their pure success would have exposed your entire life as a fraud. So you went with them. You climbed with them on their final push, the mentor seeing his protégés to the summit. And when they were at their most vulnerable, oxygen-deprived and exhausted, you wrote your ending. You killed Liam. And you tied Sarah up and left her for the mountain, a poetic, sadistic little touch. You buried them both, confident the snow would be your accomplice, just as it had been so many times before. Croft stared at him, his breathing heavy. The color had drained from his face, leaving only a waxy, sallow pallor. The kind eyes were gone, replaced by 2 chips of cold, dead stone. He knew he was cornered. The evidence was absolute. The narrative he had lost control of was now a steel trap closing around him. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the fire. The confrontation was over. The confession was about to begin. Julian Croft stood motionless for a long moment, the silence in the grand library stretching into an eternity. The fire cast long, dancing shadows across his face, making it impossible to read his expression. Then a slow, thin smile spread across his lips, a chilling, joyless expression that did not reach his eyes. The last vestiges of the charming philanthropist dissolved, leaving behind something reptilian and cold. Remarkable, he said, his voice no longer the warm baritone of a public figure, but a flat, clinical monotone. Truly remarkable investigative work, Mr. Thorne. I underestimated you. He walked over to the decanter, his movements no longer stiff with shock but fluid with a strange, liberated grace. He poured a generous measure of scotch into a heavy crystal tumbler and swirled it, the amber liquid catching the firelight. He had not offered one to Alex again. This was for him alone. You are correct, of course, he said, taking a small sip. In almost every detail. He turned to face Alex, leaning back against the ornate mantelpiece. There was no remorse in his posture, no guilt in his eyes. There was only the detached, intellectual curiosity of a scientist discussing a successful experiment. Legacy, he mused, looking into the flames. It's the only thing that truly matters in the end. Not money, not fame. Those are fleeting. But legacy is stone. It's the story they tell after you're gone. I have spent a lifetime carving my legacy, Mr. Thorne. Every word I've written, every mountain I've climbed. It is a work of art. My work of art. He took another sip of his drink. Liam and Sarah, he said their names as if they were abstract concepts. They were brilliant. Too brilliant. They were pure, yes, but their purity was a threat. Their success, a winter K2 ascent without oxygen, would have been the definitive statement in modern alpinism. It would have become the new benchmark. My life's work, my curated heroic failures, as you so eloquently put it, would have become footnotes. Quaint stories from a bygone era. I would not allow that. He described the murders with a horrifying lack of emotion, his voice calm and steady. He recounted climbing behind Liam, admiring his strength even as he planned the perfect moment to strike. He never saw it coming, Croft said with a shrug. One moment he was taking a step, the next his story was over. It was efficient. And Sarah? His face twisted in a faint grimace of annoyance. She was the complication. She screamed. So dramatic. I had to subdue her. Leaving her for the mountains seemed the most fitting end. Poetic. She wanted to embrace the purity of the elements, so I gave her an eternity of it. He looked directly at Alex, a flicker of what might have been genuine curiosity in his dead eyes. You see, Mr. Thorne, the world needs its myths. It needs its tragic heroes. It doesn't need a happy, smiling couple on a summit. It needs a story of struggle, of loss, of a lone survivor who brings back wisdom from the abyss. I provide that. I am the curator of the myth. Their sacrifice was necessary for the preservation of the art. The confession was complete. It was a dissertation on psychopathy, a chilling manifesto of narcissistic obsession. As he finished, the faint sound of sirens grew louder on the country road outside. Alex had alerted the local constabulary before he'd even stepped out of the taxi. Croft heard it too. He looked at his drink, drained it in one final gulp, and placed the empty tumbler carefully on the mantelpiece. He smoothed his cashmere sweater. Well, he said with a sigh, I suppose every story must have its final chapter. The resolution was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. The audio file, the forensic reports on both bodies, the financial trails, and now, a full confession, which Alex had been recording on his phone since the moment Croft began to speak. Julian Croft, the celebrated hero of the mountains, was arrested in his library, the sirens wailing as the story he had so carefully crafted for decades came crashing down around him. Justice was served, but it was a somber victory. The names of Liam and Sarah Jenkins were cleared of any hint of failure. They were recognized not as victims of the mountain's fury, but as victims of a man's monstrous ego. Their story was retold, this time with the truth at its center. Months later, Alex Thorne stood on a balcony in Chamonix, the familiar peaks of his home range cutting a sharp silhouette against a clear, cold sky. He thought of Liam and Sarah, of their bright, burning ambition. Their legacy would not be the one Croft had tried to write for them. It would be one of courage, of love, and of a truth that had, against all odds, been clawed back from the ice. The ghost of his own past felt a little further away now, the weight on his soul a little lighter. He had not brought them back, but he had brought back their story. And sometimes, that was the only form of rescue that was truly possible.